Hey, well, happy Sunday, everyone. I'm your host, Greg Clay, and welcome to Purpose Driven Pivot. We've got a very, very awesome episode ahead of us today, and I'm so humbled and honored to have my good friend, Kristen Daniel, join us. Kristen, how you feeling? What's going on?
Feeling good. Thank you for having me, Clay.
Glowing on screen? Listen, glowing over there.
I love the show, and so I'm excited to be here.
I appreciate you making time, especially on a Sunday, to be with us. And so I'm really excited because we got an awesome response for folks that RSVP and will tune in. And so for those folks that are watching via Zoom and also via Facebook, welcome. If this is your first time or your second or third or fifth time, this is a platform that was birthed out of an event that I did this past June, and to carry on the conversations from that event, talking with the dynamic leaders about pivots on their journey, talking about the many different things that folks are doing in our communities. I felt that this platform is very, very intriguing, not just to myself, but others based on the response that we've been getting. And so Kristen joins this awesome, awesome collection of people that I consider friends. Kristen's more so like extended family, which y'all will probably get a glimpse into as we kind of go into the conversation today. But she is a remarkable, remarkable, remarkable soul. Kristen and I first met at FAMU, and we found out.
Happy homecoming, rappers.
Right, happy homecoming. This is the week here, right? And just like a lot of people from the Atlanta metro area, while we may not have crossed paths in Atlanta is such a small, just the area is so small. Look, if you can't come across people in 2 or 3 degrees of separation, I know some of the same folks, which Kristen and I found out we did. It just made for a much more beautiful foundation for our friendship as we got to know each other at FAMU. And so she's seen, and I've seen her grow from our bright eyes, towards enlightenment and, just changing over time and how things, just go and evolve. And so I'm extremely grateful for you and for your friendship over so many years, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Likewise, Clay. You couldn't have said it better with the growth, and it's so fun to watch people evolve over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thank you again for having
me. And you've been a pusher. You've been somebody that pushed me to not just be a better person or just kind of push through as real friends do. And telling a candid truth, Kristen, you've always been like, hey, Clay, like, that's not you, bro. Like, get back to your center, because your you is pretty dynamic, right? And so I'm extremely grateful for all of that. Like, you one of those people that be like, hey, bro, like, let me rap with you for a second. That type of thing, which I sincerely appreciate.
You got me sounding like Joe Clark from Lean On Me.
Take the chains off the doors. Hey, we need more Joe Clarks. Male and female Joe Clarks. You know what I mean? We can talk about education, right? If you want to, but we can take the conversation anywhere you want to. Funny story for viewers, and I want to hear how the fam is doing. I remember one time, we've got so many memories, right? I remember one time at your folks' place, we were like eating, celebrating, right? And they had these.
My graduation party.
Mm-hmm.
Or either like one of the Christmases or something like that.
Was it graduation or Christmas? No,
I think it might have been more Christmas time. I don't know. We have to ask Isaac.
Yeah. Shout out to the boy a lot. Listen, so you had these ribs there, right? And you know how when you kind of enjoy yourself, you get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 ribs. I kept asking Kristen's mom, like, yo, where the ribs at? You know what I mean? Like, looking for the ribs. I think she had put the ribs away. And so my name affectionately became
Where the Ribs At. Like, my parents literally asked me, how's Where the Ribs At? Like, that's what we call Clay in my nuclear family.
Listen, them ribs were so good.
Hey, where the ribs at?
Where the ribs at? But I also wanted to shout out Kristen. She has her own platform where she has these very, very dynamic conversations, pushing the status quo. It's not that deep. Mm-hmm. And I want you to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the conversation. I'll check out a few. And I mean, you're just doing some remarkable things, again, with some remarkable people, advancing conversations as you have typically done. I also want to make sure folks know that she is a founder. She founded her own nonprofit. how many years ago?
10.
10 years ago, celebrating 10 years with the mentorship, which really, through my experience, and I want to thank you for bringing me along in that journey early on, because the focus on recidivism, while I was very ignorant to it, it was my gateway to understanding more about recidivism. And I'm so proud of the work that you continue to not just highlight in that space, but the work, the lean in work that you've been doing with people that you've met along that journey. And as an entrepreneur and as a strategist behind some really cool things, not just here in Atlanta, but with the things that you've worked on, I really think it's going to make for a very dynamic conversation today. And so, Kristen, start off by telling folks a little bit about yourself, and I'll yield the floor to you because I feel like I'm talking too much out of my excitement.
Oh, not at all. Clay, thank you so much for having me. I think it's going to be really fun. I'm Kristen Daniel. Without giving all the regular, you know, from the South, have lived in different places in the world, went to FAMU, undergrad. But what I think is most important to share about me is that I just love um, discovering things and being curious about things and figuring out how to like get information to people so that people can see themselves. I feel like that's what I've been doing, like even as like a kid, you know. So
Mhm.
when you bring up like, hey, you're the person that you told me that I'm the person that's like, hey, let me rap with you. I just, you know, I think if I had to describe myself to someone else, I'm a person that, like I said, wants people to see who they really are. And
Mhm.
a lot of times that's what's in the way is some kind of pertinent information. So um, information plus creativity usually yields the things that I'm working on.
Mhm.
Um, right now, for occupation wise, I consider myself to be a strategist.
Mhm.
Um, I run a consulting practice. And it's funny because it's something that I've been doing for a while, but never decided to really push it. But in this practice, I'm spending a lot more time these days in it.
Mhm.
And I'm working with small businesses and just under medium sized businesses. Most of them are um, really cool businesses that have these really amazing owners and founders. And what I do is come in and help them figure out their business model, think about where they want to go in the future, help them develop more of a product mindset,
Mhm.
and basically take a lot of the frameworks that are used for more larger scale technology companies and try to take that, remix it, and help them be
Mhm.
their best. They might not ever grow at scale, but there's just so much opportunity for every single idea that someone brings to bear to have its way and its chance, right?
Mhm.
So I do that with strategy across all different types of industries.
Mhm.
I'm agnostic industry wise, and I focus on my function.
Yeah. Yeah.
Outside of that, I just like creating things. So
I want to add creative to your profile
yeah,
because I mean you are.
yeah, quarantine has made me embrace that. So fun
Okay.
fact, Clay,
Okay.
all of my internships in undergrad were actually in the music industry. And I think, most people don't know that about me, but I've
Mhm.
always been drawn to creative spaces. I'm still coming into being like, oh, but you're really a creative.
I think that's something that, and even for me and I mean, it's a neglected talent. I've got to get back on my part.
Mm-hmm.
The world hasn't been forgiving to creatives enough, and I'm just talking about my lens as an artist.
Yeah.
You consider music and the freedom around music, you consider, creative writing, in a fictional space. I mean, even from film production, we talk about Atlanta, um, it just hasn't been as forgiving as I think it is now. I think there's this resurgence around, appreciating, the especially in the film, thinking that route around writing, right? But I can't really put my finger on the thumb of why that pulse is kind of vibrating more, but I kind of feel it differently, which is driving me even more to think creatively and work with more people in the creative space, particularly here in Atlanta, because you can see like resources shifting that way a lot too.
Yeah, to me, I think it's more from a macro perspective. We have we're just coming out of a time where everybody praised specialists, and it like, and from a labor market standpoint, it's like, oh, what do you specialize in? Oh, what do you specialize in? And then that kind of permeated into overall culture. And now we're back at a time where things move so quickly. We need more polymaths. We need more people who are Renaissance people. Everybody should, to me, I think everybody should have their own version of being like a Swiss Army knife. But we're just now getting to this place where there's room created for that, where people actually feel comfortable being that type of person. But I'm excited about like the direction things are going in.
I've never heard it put that way. People being their own version of their Swiss Army knife, and the utility around being flexible to adjust, the ability to do certain things at certain times. I like that visual. I really do like that vision. That's
Yeah, I would
good.
consider
We're
you,
gonna.
right? Like the things that I would say that someone looking on the outside is like, oh, here's Greg, and Greg is into public service, but they're probably not as familiar with how you're able to execute on your love for public service using all of the other things,
Yes,
the
very true.
marketing, the music, the entertaining people, and painting and all of that. Like that stuff draws and informs the way you interact with people.
Yeah, yeah. Not being intimidated by the canvas, the
That's
blank
right.
canvas, has
That's
been, one of the things that I kept that creativity at the forefront because, the blank canvas can be intimidating. You talk about where to start and what to start building from. Anytime I walk into an opportunity, and whether it's a blank canvas, literally or figuratively, those are the ones where I've really had the opportunity to thrive.
yeah,
When clients and when folks in the space are receptive to, and it's beautiful that you said like people praising the specialties or specialists,
hmm
and then now people you walk into the room, folks are saying, "Well, hey, but what about this creative stuff?" I totally agree.
yeah.
I totally agree.
Time. It's our time.
So getting back to the way you navigate your relationships with founders, and talking about how you add value and candor to the lives of your friends, in building these relationships with founders and really giving them, the opportunity to be their best self while being critical. Are there some of the, I don't want to assume that there are some parallel things that you're doing, right? And our conversation that we might have about growth is different than the founder that you're working with.
It's not a
But
me tell you that right now.
okay, tell us a little bit about that and adjusting to that.
Well, first of all, it's just a thread. So I do want to say, mentorship started that, and that's all that had always been about, like making sure incarcerated people had information so that they can see themselves and their potential, right?
Mhm.
And then from mentorship, we launched a for-profit kind of sister company called New Skill. And New Skill is about making sure that you have the skills to continuously evolve, because it's that look in the mirror you deserve to know whatever it is you need to get wherever you want to go.
Mhm.
And then in the all of the consulting work that I've done, I have had to tap into my experience being a teacher, my experience being an entrepreneur, my experience being, an advisor to friends. Sometimes that stuff plays a role, because at the end of the day, if you can't be honest with yourself, that is going to be the biggest barrier to business success. Like, and you do need someone that, at least I've gotten good feedback from my clients of, they're like, I don't want to be, I'm not looking for someone to tell me what I want to hear. I'm trying to figure out how to get to the next place.
Sure.
So that's how that plays out in the road in my work. It is sometimes with my coaching clients, we are digging a little bit further. Like, okay, this person might be making a decision, and I don't have a problem saying, well, what does your husband think about that? What do you think about that? Why do you like this idea? Does this idea have something to do with your childhood? Like, I need to know all of that before we start wasting money.
Yeah.
And I might do that a little bit less with the larger scale clients where I'm working with them on specific projects, but that still informs how I decide to help them with their strategy.
But was that something that you pivoted into, or it was just a business principle from the onset for you?
You mean the consulting fees pivoting into?
Well,
Well,
having those
like
types
the
of
approach.
conversations with founders, right?
Well, it's just when you realize that's who you are,
Gotcha.
it I would say what I've pivoted into is accepting who I am at the core.
Gotcha.
I hadn't always liked that I'm that type of person. So growing into it, and it's like, okay, well, this is your personality. How are you going to channel it to make life better for other people and to give to the world and all of that? Like, I'm just growing into that, and now I feel very comfortable in it. But it's not any part. That's not anything that I've always been comfortable with.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can imagine. I mean, even for people that are, watching and will check this out, your nugget of advice for people that might be struggling with that same type of thing.
Yeah.
What was?
I would say, you mean what was the impetus for?
Well, if it was one thing, I'd love to hear about it. But it sounds like it might have been a journey.
It's like a little snowball of things.
Okay.
I definitely would say mentorship really drove, like, my time teaching when I taught overseas. That was like where the seed got planted. But then mentorship took that to another level because you have to be yourself, and someone, like, it's not a game. Like, when someone is in prison, they're the letters or the assignments that you're giving them, or when you're coming to like, that makes you grow up and be like, hey, I have to actually lean into this.
Sure.
And then I think coming into the last couple of years where I've been, like, okay, where do I take this? What do I do with this? Like, what's the next thing I do? And then still saying, like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I need to listen more to the feedback that I'm getting from the people who I love, and then take that for better or for worse. And I've learned that, like, a lot of what I have thought has always been a burden is, look at you. It's one of the first things that you brought up about our friendship, where I used to look at that as a burden, right? So you just keep hearing the feedback over and over again. And what we don't want to do is be externally validated. It's not about, like, external validation, but when you hear things from people you love or people that you're trying to help, then that's when you say, okay, well, maybe I need to change the way that I listen to myself.
Yep.
Figure out how to use this as something that can help people and actually own it.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference, is the confidence in it. I feel very confident in my personality.
And so the pivot into, having conversations, I know you mentioned the for-profit side or for-profit piece, with actually building and working through the skills, tell us a little bit about navigating from, being there and being a resource for, inmates that are coming back and transitioning into what we might call the real world, for lack of a better term, because it's certainly a real world still if you locked up, right? And so, tell us a little bit about, what that journey entailed.
That experience was like crazy, with a lot of pivots, and you never knew what was going to come at you. So basically, and I'm trying to make sure I don't take too much time telling the whole story, but we started off with, my friend sent me a letter in the mail. His cellie was like, hey, can you ask your homegirl if she could look at my business plan? And then that planted the seed for mentorship. And then, of course, I came to you, and Rochelle and Chelsea like, hey, I got an idea. We need a board and we're gonna do, pen pal business mentorship, which meant like working, looking at stuff through the mail and then using snail mail to kind of scan and let people in the outside world be able to give feedback. Then that eventually grew into real curricula and like making sure that, the more that I worked in the system, you just keep coming across all of these problems, but the one that tugged at me the most was the lack of instructional design and the thought process around instructional design for people who are incarcerated, right? And what it is, and I feel like I learned this within all of these systems, but especially the prison system, people are just, it's a result of classism, the way that they're educated. So when you think of someone in prison, you think of training. And then when you think of other people, you think of education. And a lot of times those worlds never get to collide. And that's true for people incarcerated. It's true for people who are working, third shift and they need to upskill or they need access to information to do something better. Like there's just this thought that certain group of people you train, and then this other group of people you get educated.
Yeah, you're spot on.
So that's what I ran across, and so we decided, okay, we're going to make sure that we have a full course with a workbook, all of the bells and whistles that makes a sound, no program, this idea like, oh, we'll just do this willy-nilly and we'll come to the prison and it'll be nice and we'll tell a story. No. Did you finish module 1? Did you finish module 5? What did you score on that assignment? So we just kept sharpening how we would deliver this information, and the information was around entrepreneurship and innovation. So we would teach like SWOT and business model canvas and lean startup and talking about like the just different things that were out in the space that may not be available to someone who was incarcerated. And eventually our main thing became, here's the course. There would be a group of people at the federal prison that would take the class. So they would enroll in the class. I would go in and teach the course. And there's 5 modules. And when they got to module 4, that's when we would have people from the outside world grading the assignments for that. And then we go to module 5 and close out. And then they would get credit on their prison record for the work that they were doing with us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, your conversations with, I'd say for lack of a better title, the practitioners, those folks that were in charge kind of the prisons and those people in the penal system that were administrators. How was your experience working and building with them? Were they like, hey, Kristen, come on in?
So it's really weird because you have systems within systems.
Yeah.
So you have people who really, they are there and they want to help. And they're signing up to go actually help, but because they actually work for whatever department, they're looked upon as like people who want everybody locked up.
Yeah.
While they're like, spent all this time learning social work or psychology or something to come in and support rehabilitation of folks. I had many different types of experiences. When I first started off, I had a really hard time getting what I thought would be more support. So for example, there was a time very early on in the process. I don't know if you remember this. Fun story. I kept trying to get into the state system and be like, hey, can we come help? Can we help? And then had a meeting with one of the big people in charge there right before he retired. He's like, yeah, okay, cool. Susan Taylor, like the emeritus in chief of Essence magazine, met one of the board members and was like, "Oh my God, I love what y'all are doing. You know, it's amazing. I'm looking at your board page and you got all these young Black people on your board. What can I do to help?" I'm like, "Okay, bet." I didn't say bet to her, but I'm like, "Can you help us like with the mentorship part? Like, can you help us get mentors for the work that we're doing?" She's like, "Sure." So I come back to the table like, "Hey, man, we have, this is a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
can we get started?" And it was like crickets
Mm.
until finally two people who were working in reentry in the system were like, "Don't worry about it, Kristen. We're gonna figure out how to get you into one of the prisons." And that's how I got into a prison. But just think about that. Like, in some ways, most of the work that I had to do at the beginning was being able to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the hardest part. But then as time goes by, you realize like this is, for some people it's their calling, and for other people it's their job. I did have a security officer say, "Hey man, why you coming in teaching them this stuff? We should be the people trying, you should be teaching this level of stuff to other people who deserve it more." I've definitely had a security guard say that. So there's all these different, it's very nebulous. It's a big soup of people, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and to kind of summarize that is basically there's a bunch of people. Everybody thinks that they care, but their version of what freedom looks like for folks is based on their personal walk through American experience.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And you've done so much work on trying to peel back the layers of that narrative
So many.
because there's an essence of pop culture that dilutes what the real narrative is. There's,
Yeah.
people's personal experiences. There's even, your personal perspective of friends or family that went through the process. Like there's so many different narratives attached to it, but the healthier part around what it is that you've been working in for the last 10 years, I think it's amazing, amazing work. And thinking about just that journey, the building blocks around so many different things that you were doing in that space, how it prepared you for, exactly what you're doing right now
Hmm.
in that lens, you
Yeah,
know?
I didn't realize it as much until this year when I started doing more consulting. I'm like, wow, like I started thinking of assignments from mentorship that the consultant clients should be
Yeah.
using. It did teach me a lot. I've learned so much, and I continue to learn so much, even from the decisions I had to make as a leader in
Mhm.
mentorship, how we changed the model, what it is today versus what it was initially planned to be, and
Mhm.
landing there and being happy with it. Like there's
Yeah.
so many ebbs and flows, but I've learned a lot.
In that high reliability space, right, where you got to put solutions together in that pressure cooker,
Yeah.
those are different circumstances and a different
I
context from
got
somebody just kind of going out and consulting on something where you're someone's lifeline to hope, and your solution, while it's no surefire way to, or no silver bullet around solutions, like
Yeah.
you just can't play around with it.
Yeah. And I think people would be surprised to find out that my biggest like enemy, I wouldn't call it an enemy, but the biggest barrier I actually had from like beginning of mentorship until now is actually people on the outside and how we perceive who we are in comparison to the systems that exist.
Mm.
So when I hear people say, "Yeah, locking everybody up because of private prisons," and I'm thinking, bro, did you go check your Vanguard account though? Because you're bragging about this new salary you got. You bragging about the offer you got. You feel
Yes.
entitled to the things that you got because you did something that your brothers or your cousins or the people that you grew up didn't do. So one, you people actually think that they have morally earned the class that they're in. That's one of the
Mm.
biggest problems with the prison system. right? It's
Mm.
not like, yes, it's sentences, it's the history of slavery, it's all of that. But in modern day, it is
Yeah.
the fact that most people feel like they have morally earned the life that they live,
Mm. That's
right?
real.
So it's like, I'm not gonna help this person, or I'm not gonna, my cousin is working on this, or my uncle is working on this, but I did all this work to make it out. And so you're reinforcing the system. So don't worry about the private prisons. What you need to worry about is if the private prisons are in your 401k account, and
Mm.
are you willing to make an introduction? Are you willing to give feedback to someone who's starting a business outside of prison? Are you willing to make an introduction for a job? Or do
Yeah.
you feel like you earned something and that you're living the life that you deserve, that you earn morally, and that person needs to just figure it out?
Chris, a lot of people don't want to hear that.
I
A lot
know
of people don't want to hear because it attaches an additional layer of responsibility to having to change something that
it
they
does.
might not even have information or be bumping around. You
It
think
it
you know what you know.
highlights poverty. It highlights that when you put people on different little, not chains, but like little conveyor belts,
Mhm.
people going school and prison pipeline, we already know about that conveyor belt. The problem is the other folks on the other conveyor belt.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna take you, I'm gonna separate you from him, I'm gonna send you down that side of the plant. You're gonna go to Boys and Girls Club or YMCA, you're gonna play AAU basketball, you're gonna get a scholarship to whatever school. We're gonna make sure you're in Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Then we're gonna put you in Inroads. Then we're gonna put you in Jack and Jill. That is a pipeline that people don't understand. If you are not already coming from a certain social class, there's no difference. They're just two parts of the plant. So when I take someone and I'm separating them and I put them on the other path, and the world continues to tell them that if they continue towards the path of productivity and earning money, that their problems have gone away, then you have people who, that's why they're not willing to help. That they don't think that they were on a conveyor belt. They think that they like magically, fairy godmother got them out of whatever circumstance. And that's where you get that. I had someone call me maybe 2 months ago, and we can move from this subject if you want to, but like,
No,
I,
I love it. I love to listen to it. Go ahead.
yeah, I had somebody call me 2 months ago and was like, hey, I remember, you have been working with incarcerated people. I have a cousin, but he's a distant cousin, and I'm exaggerating, but it was like,
Yeah, yeah.
he's having trouble with housing. And I was thinking, so you trying to do your cousin a favor, but you wanted to make sure that I knew how distant you were. I don't care if that was your husband. But that is the problem. It's the other people on the conveyor belt. And so while they're still asleep, but they are the ones that we need. We can't have our best and brightest getting to a certain point where their idea of growing and building community is to only continue to get on a conveyor belt to like try to get to influence and
Yeah,
just a little bit of money,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's those people. You know how they call people in the prison um pipeline. They're like, oh, those people. No, y'all, y'all, y'all. If you
Right.
heard me call out an organization that you've had contact with, you were on a belt. You were on
Mhm.
a belt. They wanted because they want to separate y'all, because the moment that those two people that start off on the conveyor belt get together, and I take a brother who has, gone to FAMU and figured out engineering. Then I take another brother who might have, you know, had a hard way, but he figured out carpentry, and you put them together.
Oh, that's what
Then
the magic is. Yeah.
you don't have them like thinking that one is better than the other, and you put them together.
Hmm.
That is a land development company. That is, real estate. That it like they want people on those two different conveyor belts, and we have to stop acting like that other conveyor belt doesn't exist.
Kristen, man, so I find myself in the middle of those types of conversations, And a lot of people don't even want to talk about just that simple dynamic. Well, it's not a simple dynamic, first and foremost,
Very not.
right? It really is like this matrix that we're in and we're brainwashed into. But folks don't even want to discuss it because, again, it attaches this responsibility to it. And as a person in the middle, I wouldn't say I'm frustrated about it, but I recognize kind of this underlying theme that you even mentioned. The power in someone that may have been going this way and someone may have gone that way. The similarities, based first and foremost, but the power in those folks having just a conversation. But because you want to live here and socialize here, or spend your little bit of money over here,
A little
you
bit of money.
don't even want to deal with or address or recognize. And Atlanta is a place where that has become very, very the norm.
Oh, it's
This
the norm. And
this
not only is it the norm, but
yeah,
you have one group that culture vultures the other one,
yeah,
right? So I
yeah.
see you hanging out, you got your little streetwear on, you playing your trap music because you're not at Deloitte or BCG today. You get what I mean?
Yeah,
So
totally, totally.
oh, I'm still like, don't get it twisted. Don't let the suit fool you, right? And it's like, bro, what are you like? Which stop? Like, this is why we should not be separated. Like, this is why we should be separated. Because now you want to make sure you
Yeah.
still attached to the same
Mm.
people that you're refusing to provide access for, to provide opportunity, refuse to help. Like, don't do that.
Mhm. And I to say, even in the context of relationships, of just how we navigate. Like,
Yeah.
once you lose that connection, and this hasn't happened personally to me because by the grace of God, I've been able to keep that rhythm and keep that connection. Sometimes to what folks might call my detriment, right? Um, but I just don't see another way around it. I just don't see another way around how we catapult to this next level without that bridge and without that recognition. Just again recognizing that we're all connected in this whole journey.
Yeah.
No matter what it is that you want for you or your family, yourself, like there's still this broader debt to be repaid that we all are attached to. And it don't matter what kind of shoes you got on, you know what I mean? Or where you're going to kick it. I always say, people, God bless our city, but people driving through Atlanta to get to Wakanda. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-mm.
you done pass by all of this Atlanta stuff to get to what you call Wakanda. And you've completely been blinded by everything in the middle when you're a part of that same thing too. And if you go even further out, you'll find very quickly that what I mean, people aren't going to be as receptive to you blended in those cultures anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things where if we could just get a grasp in understanding the economic model of the US and just know it for what it is so that you can learn how to exploit it.
Sure.
We haven't accepted it yet. And the truth is, we, in all shapes and forms, um, are at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to capitalism because the engine relies on our consumption and our labor. And so most of what our lives are kind of designed around is productivity. And we equate productivity to morality for that very reason. Like we've been kind of conditioned to be like productive means I'm a good person, not knowing that those are messages for us so that we can contribute to consumption and production, you know? So,
And there's no significance in that at all. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
like the significance is even if it reveals itself, it quickly fleets because the substance just isn't there.
It's not. We are everyone is a whole person and a whole being And if you believe in God, you're God's child, like each and every one of us. Just like as you are with, you know, nothing else, like nothing more. You don't need to be anything more than, you know, God's creation.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. Beautiful. I want to talk about it's not too deep, right?
Okay.
I mean, it's not that deep, right? And so, for the conversation that you've been having, Chris, you talk about like that's why it's cool. I won't even say we went down a rabbit hole. Like, this is still surface level,
Yeah,
folks
it
that are
really,
watching. Because
because you know me well, so you like, yeah.
Charlotte, look, like that's why I'm so grateful for you, right? When you think about remarkable topics, because you're always trying to push dialogue and conversation, even before this platform, what are some of well, I'd even say one or two of the most remarkable topics that you discussed where you're really like, hey, like not just what we just, finished talking about, but things that you add to say, all right, when you go back and talk to your people, your network, your 2 or 3 or 10 people, like just the kind of stuff that you may want to consider thinking through. And
Yeah.
I know that's a strong question, right?
Yeah, it is
But you
it's a strong question. Like,
but like just remarkable topics, and it doesn't have to necessarily even be Kristen related to a lot of what you see now. It doesn't have to necessarily be related to politics, right?
yeah.
Just when it comes to messages, or it can be related to politics, just looking at it from a different lens. I wanted to make sure I asked you that because you are you moderate and you are a conversationalist, complimentary, right? Uh, but I did not want to ask that question
Yeah. Well,
because
first
I
of all,
want to be put on to some. I want to be put on to.
yeah, I could think of a couple of subjects that I think are interesting for anybody to explore when you're kicking it with your friends or want to just get to know someone else and their thoughts, right? One thing I want to point out is it's not that deep was something that I started for my own self-healing. So there's no intention. That's why like one of the hashtags is that it's not a podcast. Like I never intended to um build it for other people. I selfishly started that for myself because um I'm like, you're too old to always feel like so alienated in your thinking. Gotta be somebody else that want to have these conversations. And so the phrase "it's not that deep" actually came from me, the messages that I've been told since I was a little girl. It's not
Mhm.
that deep, or Katie, it's not that deep, or you went way over it. And I'm like, no, F you guys. This is the middle finger. So it's like, it's not that deep is like my healing and my way of like standing into that. And
Yeah.
it's turned out into something completely different where people are like, oh yes, I've always wanted to talk about this.
Mhm.
That said, question one of the questions that I think is interesting to talk about talk with your friends about would be, I love talking about like inner child healing and how it relates to relationships and marriages.
Mhm.
And mainly because I think village dynamics, so village, right?
Okay.
Individualism, should we be choosing, how do you balance living in a capitalistic society mixed with the fact that we are designed as people to live in village? What
Mhm.
does that look like to look at whether you're single or married? How do you play your role in helping wealth creation? I do think relationship topics are actually topics about money, and we don't know it.
Mhm.
So like if someone isn't living there, if two people are together and they're it's so toxic that we don't get the best out of each of those people, that means that there's two people who aren't giving the world the things that we need. Right. So a lot of it's suppressed in these personal things that we think could be resolved with like a degree or like a certificate or something. And it's really not. It's like, how can we get people to like date or hang out and be friends with the people that aren't going to stop them from giving greater good, the whole society, everything that we need to be great,
Oh,
right?
yo. So I'm
So
glad I asked that question, yo.
yeah, so those in that area, like so childhood trauma, how it plays in
Mhm.
relationships, friendships, and marriages, and how we make sure that those are healthy, because that really is like the root to the wealth that we think we need that will change things.
It's been such a pivotal part of my growth. Like as you're even talking about it, it's just singing to my spirit in the rhythm that I've been in for the last few years,
Yes.
coming to grips with that, right?
Yeah.
And the power that you get in it, but there's also this 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 transparency that you can't get from anywhere else.
Mhm.
And the only way I think to get there, Kristen, is having these types of conversations. Like it's not a I believe in counseling, yes, more than I used to. More than I used to. I'm not all the way there yet, but
Like we gonna keep reeling you in.
I'm not all the way there yet. But shout out to the good counselors out there. That's why I believe in it. A little bit more, right? But there is this context of how you converse with those people that are your friends that you care about. And if you're not talking about those types of things, like does the real tipping point growth happen? Like the tipping point growth to where it really, and it's all a journey, but the tipping point growth to where like everybody's like growing in that cipher in a different way. Like my friendships with folks, like it's been cool to see that
Mhm.
because of, and maybe it was always there, but I began to see it more because I was able to recognize the trauma that's there, be vulnerable to it, and then just say, "Hey, now that we're here, what we doing?
What's up, y'all?
Yeah, what's up, y'all? And it be this environment with friends and say, you know what? Like we always knew it was there. We always saw it, and it just makes you even like better friends with the
Yeah,
people that you love and
absolutely.
care
I
about.
appreciate that about our friendship.
Mhm.
You grow from watching other people grow.
Yeah.
And it one of the parts that makes you grow is having to retrain yourself not to expect the old person. So even having to let people evolve, because you see the same like core face of everybody, right? You might be
Mhm.
friends with somebody that you've been friends with since middle school, and it's the same outer body, but their spirit has changed.
Yeah.
You have to allow and nurture that and make room for it, and then make sure that you're still showing up in the way that works with who they've evolved to.
But you mentioned a great thing about that, right? Once you get there, it isn't just a hey, that was awesome. There's this work around, okay, now with the opportunity to be your best self, what does that look like?
Yeah, where do we go
You
from
know? Yeah,
there?
where do we as individuals go and where do we go in having to shape this narrative for people that are looking to understand things more about what we represent,
Mhm.
or even that calling on our lives that speaks to this distraction. You've been distracted for 37 years. Now it's like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
But some people never get a chance to even see that because they may not be able to have this type of conversation. You know?
Yeah, I call those coping personalities.
Coping personalities.
So
Tell me
like
more about that.
I think most of so I think that until you have a good understanding of self and where you need healing, even who you think you are and who you've presented yourself to other people, it's probably not the real you.
Mhm.
But if it works for good, it's really harder to change.
Yeah,
If it, gets you to the edge of a cliff, then you might end up changing and having some like, okay, wait a minute, let me figure out who self is.
sure.
But for the most part, um, we don't know people until they know where they need to be healed because they don't even know them. So I call
Mhm.
that call those personalities coping personalities, and,
Good.
and it gets reinforced. People will be like, "Oh, you changed." Well, how do you know if somebody changed or if they were never that person from the get go?
That's real. That's real. I've experienced that. because of just the many different dynamics of life and moving and, not addressing stuff and
Yeah.
toxic stuff, the healthy stuff, the toxic again, like, man, like, glory be to God.
Lord, be
And I'm here now, you know what I mean? But
here, friend.
listen,
Right here.
but let's even say on your journey, like, and we like to keep these things at an hour, and so we're not there, but we're coming up to it. For the challenge for people that are in that space, along with what you kind of personally grown through, right? I think that's a great topic, one, and so I don't think we need to pour 3 or 4 on them because that'll require 3 or 4 different episodes. But I really do think that's a good one to kind of mull around because it will have these different branches and ripples around other ways to converse with your friends about things. Um, but other things people should be kind of thinking through and navigating about when it comes to those personal journeys, particularly when it comes to some of the pivots that you made,
Yeah.
right? Other thoughts?
Yeah. So with that in mind, accepting, um, not being too attached to decisions that you didn't even make with your healed self.
Not being too attached to the decisions that you made to your
Prior to healing.
prior to healing.
Yeah. Like when I think of, to try to make it less abstract and less cerebral, when I think of people and I meet people that are going through career changes or they're deciding on a different business or whatever, um, oftentimes, at least with clients, we'll have a conversation and I'm like, what at the core, like if you're unapologetically you, what would you like to do, or what direction would you like to go, or these many directions would you like to go? And they'll say it, and then when we start saying, okay, well, let's figure out how to get there, the first thing is to run back to say, okay, but I want to bring this with me and this with me and try to fit. Like I'm trying to fit because you've spent, it's almost like sweat equity in
Sure.
building a life based on.
That's tough to let go, Kristen.
It is.
That's super tough.
Yeah, but
When
that's
it becomes so much of your identity, but what
too.
you're saying is that ain't even your identity.
It's not
Not
track.
even you.
It's from trauma. You thought you wanted to be blah, blah, blah because your daddy told you you wasn't X. You thought you wanted to do blah, blah, blah because your cousin told you you want to do what? You don't know who you are and what you want to do until you know exactly in what areas you would like to heal. And that, like, long story short, it gets so separated from career and entrepreneurship. It's everything. It's the core of it all. Like it's literally the core of a leader's decision making, a founder's decision making, whoever you are. Like your decisions as a professional come from who you think you are and who you've been told that you are all your life versus have you even explored who you really are.
Yeah. There's power in that identity. And there's confirmation in that. As someone that has walked in that and is, I don't think it's a total destination, right? It's just like when people talk about
Yeah, we're
success,
all
but you get closer to, who, because even once you find that person, you're still growing, right? Which is, I mean, it brings this great peace that's there. But certainly there's this infinite amount of power that's there because um, you don't worry as much about things. I was laughing with Shaw the other day because my blood pressure was the best it's ever been. Like in my adult years, it was like the best.
thing, right?
Listen, I was like, man, this is awesome. You know what I mean? Let me get some. I want to eat something crazy, right?
Let me get some pork rinds.
Right. Listen, don't you dare say pork rind because you know
I'm
exactly what
going over 80. Give me some chicharrones.
that's exactly what I would have got to. Well, you know me. Hey, but listen, so, but yeah, there's these, I think there's these dashboard indicators
Mm-hmm.
that will begin to confirm certain things on that journey. The same way some toxic signals have revealed themselves when you're not necessarily on those paths. And I think it's up to people to recognize the people that push and pull in those spaces
Mm-hmm.
in order to confirm or to say, hey, I need to get away and get out of these types of things on that path. Would you say that's the case?
I think that's spot on, Greg. Like that's really, really spot on. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Mhm.
And you just have to be in tune with it to allow it to be the dashboard. That's probably
Yeah,
it. Just don't try to ignore it.
yeah. And don't take yourself too serious to say, yeah, this has to be the dashboard, right? Now, when it comes to health, and I've mentioned blood pressure, right?
Yeah.
If the joint is through the roof, you say, oh, I feel great. You're like, hey, but you kind of need to address that. But there are certain things that I can't even put into words sometimes. You just feel at peace, you feel good, but you always know that there's something there. There's always something you need to continue to grow into, but um, you never really standing still in it. You're always kind of trying to move
Yeah.
towards.
Like you're moving through it and you get better at like living your life.
Yeah. It's new. It's new to me, Kristen.
Well, I think you're doing a great job. I think this podcast is an example. These are the conversations that you've always liked to have. So it's so great to see them being recorded. I think you do a good job at asking, like, hey, man, you're always asking people, like, hey, how'd you get into this? Or, you know, what do you like to do or whatever. So I think this is a reflection, like it fits with, you know, who you really are at the core, right? And I think a lot of the other things that you're working on, it just you seem overall just yeah, like there's not life isn't perfect, but I can figure this out.
Yeah,
And so that's a blessing to be able to see you grow into that.
that's beautiful to hear.
Blessing.
Man, what an awesome conversation.
Yes, this was
Man,
great. This was-
I think we can't go for 3 hours.
Hey, come on, let's go. I got work to do.
Well, even that framework, keeping these things to an hour, the flexibility on that for these types of conversations. Sometimes you never really know how short or how long a conversation needs to be in order to help
Yeah.
people kind of get there. But what I can say for sure is that, as people continue to check out your conversations and content, and what I'm hoping as people continue to tune in and check out, what we're doing on this platform, is that it really, really speaks to exactly what we are just talking about. Getting to know, you know, within those pivots, there's this purpose that's there. And I think you talked about it in such a great way that leads folks to where, after even seeing this type of conversation, if you're living not in line with that purpose and it just doesn't feel right, and you have to start over from scratch, have the confidence to do that.
Yes, well said.
And,
Well
and the people around you
said.
that don't forgive you for that,
Yeah.
um,
Forgive them and move on.
look at that.
Like literally forgive them because they can't forgive you and then move on.
Shut it. Look, boy, I get goosebumps, man. I get goosebumps.
And listen, that's real.
That's real.
That's good stuff.
Any last thoughts at all as we kind of close things up?
You can't come behind that.
Right. I kind of set you up on that. You're right.
Well, I appreciate the alley. Yeah,
That's right.
no, nothing other than this. Thank you. This was great. I don't feel drained. I feel energized from this conversation. So I know that that's my dashboard telling me, yeah, this was good.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much for joining myself and Kristen Daniel. Kristen, what's your handles so people can follow you?
Okay. Well, my
I know it's on the material, but I want to make sure.
yeah, my website is kristendaniel.me. And then my Instagram handle is that's brilliant KB. And if you're on Clubhouse, I'm on there. I don't really do Twitter, and then I'm Kristen Daniel on LinkedIn.
Perfect. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope y'all enjoyed this conversation because we will definitely be having this one again.
Yeah.
Before I wrap this series, I want to have you back
to
talk about certain things because I'm doing this for a year,
okay.
And then we're going to pivot into some other things.
Okay.
But
I can't wait to see. This is great.
This is beautiful. This is beautiful. Thank you. I love you. I
Thank you. Love
appreciate
you
you.
too, Clay. Very, very proud of you. So keep up the great work.
Yes, ma'am. Tell everybody I said what up.
I'm gonna tell them that I just got off the interview with where the ribs at.
I need some of them ribs.
Right.
All right. Talk to you soon. Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye, y'all.